Hey guys, this is Adam, and if you're building bigger solutions using ARM templates, you should definitely check how to modularize those templates so they're as generic as possible but easy to read. That's pretty much the topic for today. This is ARM template introduction to linked templates and nested templates. Stay tuned. Nested and linked templates are the core concepts for template modularization. Nesting means basically grabbing a template and putting that template inside of another template. This is basically act of nesting templates. If you're building linked templates, that means your other templates are externally hosted somewhere on the web and you're just referencing them from within your main template. But both of those techniques were created so that you can modularize your templates by splitting your application components into smaller and more maintainable parts by either linking them or nesting them. So how does it work? Let's start with nested templates first, because they are easier. First of all, what you're deploying is something called deployment resource. And the deployment resource goes like any other resource into resources section of your ARM template. And as normal resource, it has several properties describing that. And first one, and the most important one, is a type. Type of the deployment is Microsoft Resources/deployments. It's the key element that describes that this is a nested deployment. You pass the API version like normally, but what is interesting here is this property section where you have expression evaluation options and a property of scope. This property can take two values, inner and outer. Inner basically indicates that everything within the nested template has its own scope and should be evaluated separately from the main template. If you're using outer, that means evaluate everything within as part of the outer scope. And I'm going to show a few examples of that in a minute. Additionally, you have template property. This is where your nested template goes. So if you had any other template that you created so far, you pretty much could copy paste it and paste it here. And just like normal deployment, nested deployments allows you to specify mode, either incremental or complete. So if you want to mix those in a single template, this is your way to do it. Remember that complete mode will delete all the resources not found in a nested deployment, so you should be very careful about it. But let's talk about this evaluation options a bit more, because those are pretty much the key component that you should understand when using nested templates. So if you're using inner scope, you define it like so. But what does it really mean is that there's gonna be a separate scope created for your inner template. Everything evaluated within that scope has its own values, properties, variables, etc, etc. So if you're gonna create an expression calling a variable called example var, this will actually refer to the variables section within that scope. But this also means that this scope is closed, so you cannot refer to variables that are defined in a parent template. If you need to do so, create the parameters for this variable and just pass them along, but I'm gonna show that later on. But also, if you have an outer scope, that means for the outer scope, everything evaluated in the top section, which is the parameters variables, or in the other resources, can be used within your nested template. In which case, by using the same template but still calling the variables function and calling for the example value, you no longer refer to the variable within that template, you actually refer to the variable in a scope of the parent template. And that's pretty much the key difference here. It is important to note that the outer is the default scope for the nested templates. So this behavior that you see on the screen right now is the default that you should expect if you don't specify this property. So depending on the logic of your template, you should either choose outer or inner, depending whenever you want to have those local variables or you want to use global variables within your templates. Today I decided to separate demos in two parts. The first part is the nested templates, where I'm gonna show you how to deploy nested templates. I'm gonna show you the outer and inner scopes, the differences, and I'm gonna deploy a simple storage account using nested templates. Then we're gonna move to the second part of the presentation using linked templates. So let's go to the portal, but actually Visual Studio first. Here I'm gonna be creating the templates like usually, and I'm gonna start with very simple arm.json file. The syntax for the ARM is pretty standard, so we have parameters, variables, resources, and output section. And the section for the resources is where you put your nested templates, because it's just another resource. And that resource is fairly simple to implement. I'm just gonna copy paste it very quickly just to show you the case. It's type of Microsoft Resources/deployments. You specify the API version and you give it a name. That name can be used for dependencies. So if you're depending on this nested deployment and you want to deploy something after that, use that name. And of course, our expression evaluation scope, which I'm gonna leave as inner for now, and leave the mode as incremental. And right now, we are ready to deploy something in the nested template. And this is where it goes. The actual template that you're deploying in a nested template goes here. And then again, I'm just gonna copy a very simple empty template. So notice that this is a standard template. It has a schema, content version, and resources section. As you remember from my previous trainings, resources section can be empty just to showcase you the demo. So pretty much this example that I'm showing on the screen is the simplest nested template that you can deploy by deploying really nothing, but still implementing the nested deployments. So let's grab this and actually put this into the portal. Today, actually, instead of the portal, I will be working with the Cloud Shell. A Cloud Shell will allow me to deploy this using CLI. Reason that I'm doing this is because it's easier later on to deploy linked templates because you need to generate some stuff using the scripts. So let me go into that in a second. For now, let's create a directory for our demo. Let's go to that directory and open a Visual Studio Code with our 01 example JSON. And I'm gonna go back to Visual Studio to copy my template in here. This is so that I have a local file on my Cloud Shell with the template itself, so I can run scripts very easily. I already prepared scripts in advance, so I'm just gonna paste the deployment. As you see, this one creates a group, resource group called 01 example, creates that resource group in North Europe, and then performs the deployment from that demo JSON file. So let's run it. The deployment is finished, so we can go to the portal to review what happened. Remember that this was deploying no resources, so we're just gonna see this inside of the resource group. Go to our 01 example, to the deployments tab, to review our deployment. First of all, notice that we have a main template, which is 01 example, and the nested template separately. The nested template is from our Visual Studio from the name property, the nested template. If you're gonna review each one of them, for the main template, in the template, you're gonna see entire template that you deployed. If you're gonna go back to deployments and click on the nested template, inside of the template section, you're just gonna see the cutout part from the middle here, just this nested template here. So let's get into a bit more examples, and maybe this time I'm gonna show you what is the difference between this inner and outer scope and how does it impact the deployments, variables returned, and what you're gonna see in the portal when you're gonna start tweaking this property. And to do that, let's create two variables. One in the outer scope, which is example var, and let's give it a static value from parent. And then, if we have this variable, let's also create a variable inside of the nested template. Since this is just a template, we can again create a variable section. And this is an object, and within that object, we create the same value. So example var, and in this case, from nested. Now we have two of the same variables. One is in the outer scope, one is in the inner scope. To showcase you what will happen when you start deploying that and how does it change depending on the scope, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna implement here an output section as well. So I want to return an output. An output is an object where you define result, for instance. That will be the name for our output property. This will be a type of a string, and then the value for that output will be an expression, calling the variables and using expression. So depending on the scope, this should refer to their internal or external value. And for us to easily review that, we can grab this output section here and try to grab this parameter from inside. So you can use reference in this case. Actually, sorry, we need to get also result. Give it a type, which is string, and then value, which again is an expression. And if you want to grab result from the nested template, you use reference function and pass the name of the template. So use reference, give it a nested template here. And then you can drill down through all the properties of this template, in which case you can use outputs. Well, not the all, but you can use what it returned, which is the outputs. Then you have the result property. And then this result property has a value property. This will show you what did we return from this template in the main template as well. This is also a nice way of you passing the values back from the nested templates or from the link templates, because this approach also works for the link templates. Alright, so since we have this ready, let's quickly review, and it looks okay. Let's use inner as the first demo. So let's go to the portal and navigate back to Cloud Shell. Just in case, Cloud Shell is just another tab for me in the shell azure.com. I just maximize the screen to get more real estate. So let's go here and open another file. I'm gonna use code, and it's gonna be 02 example vario inner versus outer. And what I'm gonna do is just gonna grab my template and paste it here. This is again so that I can deploy using CLI. As you see, this template again does not deploy any resources. The purpose of this template is to show you the flow of the variables between the inner and outer scopes. So I'm just gonna paste the script that I prepared. And again, this creates a resource group in North Europe called 02 example var, and then doing the deployment. And in this case, I'm also querying the properties outputs of this deployment and colorizing it using JSON-C. So it's easier to review at glance here from the screen. So let's see the results. And as you see, the template deployed and our output says from the nested. So as you see, we were able to induce inner scope in this, so that this evaluation was picking up the inner scope variables from the execution. Let me show you what happens in the portal in this case. So inside of the portal, if you go to resource groups, you're gonna find your 02 resource group right now. Inside of deployment section, again, the name of the deployment and the nested section. If you review the nested section, if you go to template, notice something here. This is just a classic deployment that you did and nested template using variables expression. And this is the key here, this variable expression, because I want to show you what will happen here when I use the outer scope. Other than this, of course, you can review the variables, you can review the outputs of this template, which is from the template, and you can do the same in the main template. Of course, here the result will be the same because we just passed it along, and the template will be the big one because this is the main template. So let's change this. Let's change this scope from inner to outer. And let's perform the same deployment. So let's go back to Cloud Shell. Let's paste that in and just use the line above and perform the deployment again. So let's wait. Deployment finished, and we can quickly see the result. This time it was from the parent. So the evaluation omitted this part because the scope of our evaluation was on the parent. Let's go to the portal to again see the difference, because the difference is actually quite important here. So if we go and refresh this, and now go to the nested template and go to the template section, notice something interesting. We no longer have an expression here. It was actually hard-coded from the template above and put here as a static value. Therefore, you can very quickly see and review that this was no longer evaluated in its own scope because there are no expressions locally. All right. So in the last demo for this example of the flow, I want to show you how can you achieve both. So how can you use inner so that you have locally scoped variables, but still be able to access something from the outside? And as I said previously, you need to deploy template parameters. Just like with normal templates, you need to create parameter section within your nested template. And this parameter section, of course, needs to have a list of parameters. Let's maybe get it and call it parent var. And this, of course, would be of type string. And that's it. So you have now template, nested template, which takes a parameter as an input. Now, how do you pass that parameter to the inside? You actually need to define the parameter section, but outside of your template as an input here. If you remember my slides, this is internal scope, but this is already the outer scope. This is the scope of the parent, which means you can pass the parameters safely here. And to do that, just use parameters. Oh, sorry. You first create a parameter with the same name, so it knows the value of this parameter goes into this parameter. And this is a simple object with one property called value. And here you can put anything you want, in which case you can use variables and pass the example var from the parent. So you just grab this value, use it here, paste it as an input parameter to this nested template, which will be available here. And because the scope is inner, you can now use that inside of the template. So you can very safely just grab another result, maybe return result parent. And in this case, it would be parameters and no longer example var, but parent var. Visual Studio Code shows here an error, but it's not an error. It's just IntelliSense not being able to pick up very well on the nested templates. Don't worry about it. So just grab result here and also duplicate this with result parent and grab this result parent here as one of the outputs. So grab this entire template and go back to the portal very quickly to click Cloud Shell, and lastly replace your template again, save it and run it for the third time. And as you see from the result, we were able to access nested values and the parent values by passing the parameters. This is pretty much how the flow depends on the scopes, and we can move to some other examples, like for instance, now that we know how the flow of the variables and parameters in the scope works, we can actually start deploying stuff. So maybe deploy something simple, like a storage account, to show you how simply it is to use it once you understand the scopes. So let's replace this by the previous version of our template, where I just had empty resource deployment with no resources, no variables, no nothing. And what we're gonna do right now is gonna deploy the storage. And to do that, I'm gonna simply create a very small resource here inside of the resources section for the storage account. This is gonna be of type of Microsoft Storage / storage accounts, API version like normally, location, and randomly generated name for the storage account. I'm gonna maybe shift this a little bit to get more real estate. And as you see, this is a very simple storage account. If you want, you can define output section. I'm just gonna help myself out by defining in this section the output section by pasting the stub. So it's gonna return a storage URI to the main template of a type string, which will point to the primary endpoint to blob storage of the storage account. And that's pretty much it. If you want, you can again grab this using reference in the outer section of the main template, but you don't have to. So let's grab this and go to the main portal and create new template here. So let's create code04 nested storage JSON and paste our template here and perform the deploy. So, and again, quick script, creating a resource group. Then we're gonna perform deployment and return the outputs. This time the output will be empty because our main template doesn't have any outputs. So let's wait for that. And the deployment is finished. As you see, the outputs are empty. So we can go back to the portal to review the resource group and refresh the resource group 04. In this case, the nested storage, and review the storage account that was created. As you see, first of all, it was created correctly. That's very good. And if you go to the deployments and review the nested deployment, you're gonna see the template that was generated. As you see, since we had the inner scope, we see all the expressions evaluated correctly. And this is how simple it is for you to modularize using nested templates. If you don't want to, in this particular case, you could use outer as well, because we didn't use anything from inner or external scopes. But if you would use outer, this reference would no longer work, because it only works with inner scope. So that's one of the caveats to remember when using inner. If you're using reference for the resources deployed within the nested template, you can only do that using inner scope. Now that we have covered that, we can go back to the presentation and talk about linked templates. So since we have covered nested templates, what are the linked templates? First of all, what's the difference? Those are externally hosted templates, therefore they are not within your main template. And that means the schema changes a little bit. So let's talk about this first. So if you have your externally hosted template, the first thing that you get rid of is this expression evaluation option, because everything externally located, all those external templates have their own scope anyway. So let's remove that. Second of all, instead of the template section, you're gonna have a template link section, which is your URL to your template file. And this has to actually be a public URL. And the common pattern for doing that is hosting those template files on a storage account, which is one of the demos for today, and generating public temporary link to those files so that Resource Manager can access them while they still remain secure on your storage accounts. And if you want to pass the parameters, you can also use parameters link. Again, a public URL to the parameters file of your template. And this is how easy it goes. It's pretty much, in terms of resources, it's just linking external templates. So the demo 2 is very simple. We're gonna now create a link templates. Then I'm gonna show you how to deploy web application in a service plan using that, and how does it work in a real scenario. So let's go back to the portal, but actually Visual Studio again. Let's remove all that. And again, revert to our old template. So let's fix that template. As I said, we no longer need this property because this is a link template. We can change the name to link to be more to what we are doing. And then instead of template, I said we have template link. So you no longer need this internal schema. What we actually need to pass is the URI. And that's pretty much the simplest link template. We just need to pass the proper URI here that will resolve to public URL of our template. The content version is optional, but that's for later. So let's grab this template for a minute, and let's go to the portal, to the Cloud Shell for a second. So let's do it like this. Let's open Visual Studio Code, and let's call this file 05 main.json, and let's paste it here. And let's also open one more, which will be our 05 web.json. So this will be our link template. So within this web, what we're doing is, this is a very classical deployment template for the server farm, app service, and the website deployed on that app service. And it's standalone, that doesn't have any parameters, any outputs. So we can actually close this and reopen the main template. So here, what we need to do right now? Well, as I said, this nested template needs to be actually deployed somewhere in order to be a link template. To do that, we're gonna use a script in CLI to create a storage account where we're gonna upload that. I've prepared that script in advance. I'm just gonna paste it in, let it run for a second to show you what it did, and I'm gonna quickly explain after that's done. All right, the script runs successfully, so let me quickly review what happened. At the very first, we created new resource group 05.web in North Europe. Second of all, we generated random name for our storage account, and we used CLI to create new storage account in that resource group. I can quickly switch to the portal to actually show you that. So let's go to the resource group 05.web, and the storage account should appear in just a minute. And the storage account is here. Okay, so we can actually go back to the script. So this is what it did. Next, you have a script which says, let's create a container, this time generate the name link templates, and create that container name. Inside of the portal, inside of the storage account, you're gonna find a container called link templates. And next part of the script says, upload our demo.json, which is demo the variable, in which case that would be our template for the web application. So again, if we're gonna back to the portal, we're gonna find 05.web.json, right? And if we click edit, we're gonna find the content of our template. That means we already uploaded the template file to external service, a public service, in which case this is a private container. So in order for this main template to work, you actually need to generate SAS token, and you can do it in this tab here. So I'm gonna do it statically first to show you the example. So I'm gonna click generate SAS token, and this is the full public URL. If you're gonna copy this, you can verify this is working properly because you can paste it into the browser and it's gonna open your template. And this is exactly the same thing that ARM Resource Manager will do. It will try to access it publicly. So you need to be sure that this URL is working. because if you're just gonna do it without the SAS URL, just by passing the URL to the blob, you're gonna get that this blob doesn't exist. So I can actually go back to this, open the Visual Studio Code, I actually have it hidden here, and paste that URI here. And I could just deploy it like that. I can use this public. And this is pretty cool because template links are very easy to use with public GitHubs. If you're running GitHub, you're very free to just use the public URL of your file on a GitHub inside of the template link here. I could just deploy that right now, but it's not what I'm intending to do. I want to show you how to do it properly rather than hard coding public links. And to do it properly, you need to be able to pass this URL along with this long suffix here, which is the SAS token, dynamically during the execution. And to do that, we can use parameters. So let's go back to the template in Visual Studio Code, and let's create two parameters. So let's create parameter template URI, which is the classic endpoint to where your blob storage is located and where your file is located, and template SAS as a separate parameter because we want to be sure that this is a secure string. So you're not gonna see SAS token inside of the template deployment logs. This is a very good security pattern practice. So the URI now will be actually very simple because since you have those two parameters, the only thing that you need to do right now is to do concatenation. So you need to concatenate the base URI to your template with the question mark and then pass SAS token. This is the proper format. If you remember, inside of the portal, that was pretty much the same. If we go back, it's base URL to your template, question mark, and then full SAS token. Actually, usually the question mark is part of the SAS token, but it depends how you generate it. Sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. So in this case, I'm assuming it's not gonna be there, so I'm appending this in concatenation. So let's grab this template and let's go back to the Cloud Shell. Let's replace our main template. Now our main template will expect template URI and a SAS token when executing. And for that purpose, I also prepared it. What we're gonna need right now is to generate those URIs. And I prepared a script to do that. Let me show you what does it do. First of all, it generates expiration time. It grabs the connection string to the storage account, then it generates the token, then grabs the URL. And as you see, the result is very simple. Now we have a link to our storage and to our file, which we can actually test in the browser. As you see, it doesn't work, but it should work as soon as we paste the SAS token at the end. So you can very quickly test if your script is running correctly. And as you see, it does. Now all it takes is just to perform deployment with a very simple command by passing the template file, querying the outputs, querying the as a JSON-C, which is actually something we could omit, but passing the parameters template URI, which is our URL, and SAS as our token, which are those parameters here on the top that we defined for our template. So let's see if this works, and let's just wait. All right, and again we had no outputs, which is intended, so we can go back to the portal and review the results. So let's go to the resource groups, refresh 05.web, and inside of this group, as you see, we have our app service plan, and the storage account where we stored our scripts and our templates. So we can only do the last step, which is review of the deployment. And as you see, you have 05, the main template, and the link template. Interesting part is this security also that I said for the inputs, because we still know what was the file taken for this template. So we very easily can see which exact template did we use, but we don't see SAS token, which would be security vulnerability if we just leave it. But of course we can review the template itself, and like previously, we can review the link template. Interestingly now, notice that inside of the main template, you only see the links. So you cannot review the full template alone here. You always need to go to those link templates to review what was deployed inside of there. And lastly, we can actually go to the good practices section. So what are the key additional information that you should remember here? First of all, you have the deployment function, which you can use to grab the current information from the deployment, which is good if you are chaining deployments. If you're grabbing multiple files, combining them together, deployment function will return you a lot of information about current deployment, including the URI. So if this is a full deployment URI from a public URI, you can actually get it using this function. Additionally, content version, as I said previously, is not required for link templates. Additionally, if you're creating those template URLs that we did right now, using concatenation, grabbing the SAS tokens, etc., it's a good practice to do that in variables section. It's just a good practice and very popular approach that you're gonna find in documentation and GitHub pages when you're gonna be referencing other ARM templates. Additionally, if you're using copy elements, if you want to create multiple instances, then there's a slight difference here. For the nested templates, if you're using outer scope, then you need to create copy element on entire deployment resource. So on this outer scope of that resource. But if you're using inner, then you can use it within the template itself. So you can copy resources like normally. It's just slight difference depending on the scope. So just remember about it, because you're gonna get an error during deployment if you try to use it incorrectly. And lastly, as you've seen, I was able to get the outputs from the nested template, but you can also use reference to get the outputs from the link template as well. So if you're grabbing multiple templates, combining them into single main template, and then doing something outside of that template, or maybe deploying dependent resources, you can use reference function to get the outputs from those inner templates. If you want to pass values along, this is pretty much the best way to do so. And for the last part, if you want to use dependencies, you can still use dependencies on the deployment itself. Just use the depends on section and then pass the name of the deployment, the nested deployment that you want to be dependent on. And that pretty much concludes our video on nested and linked templates. As you see, it's a very powerful feature for you to modularize your template so that you can deliver enterprise-grade ready ARM templates for your organization. But for today, that's it. If you like, hit a thumbs up, leave a comment, subscribe if you want to see more, and see you next time.